The sound
We
a
keep
wrench
pushing.
makes when it
No
hits a
stopping
concrete
now.
floor is not just noise.
Hold steady.
It
Eyes
is a
forward.
declaration. It
He's
rings
coming
through a
back. We have
garage
to
the
move
way a
now.
gunshot rings
No,
through
you
a
don't
canyon.
understand.
Sharp,
Okay, I'm with
final,
you.
and full of consequence.
I have every
Every
right to
mechanic
leave.
who has ever
Not
worked
until
a
we
long
clear this
shift
up.
in a
You're
hot
not
shop
going
knows
anywhere.
that sound.
Watch me.
They know it in their bones, in the calluses on their palms, in the permanent ache at the base of their spine. It is the sound of frustration hitting its limit. It is the sound of a person who has been pushed to the edge of what a human being can silently endure. That sound echoed through Pruitt's Auto and Cycle on a Monday morning in August in Asheville, North Carolina, at exactly 7:42 in the morning. The wrench belonged to Deja Caldwell. It was a 3/8-inch drive ratchet chrome vanadium steel, the kind of tool that a serious mechanic saves up for and treats like a family heirloom. She had not thrown it in anger. She had simply lost her grip because her hands were trembling, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding back everything she was not allowed to say. She picked it up without a word. She wiped it clean with the rag tucked into her belt loop. She set it back on the tray beside her knee, and she went back to work. That was Deja Caldwell in a single motion. That was everything you needed to know about who she was before the story began to move. Asheville in August is not a gentle place. The Smoky Mountains hold the heat like a cupped palm, and the humidity rolls down from the ridgelines in waves that make the air feel like something you have to push through rather than breathe. By 7 in the morning, the temperature was already 84 degrees. Inside Pruitt's Auto and Cycle, with the bay doors open and the industrial fans running at full speed, it was worse. The fans did not cool the air. They just moved the heat around and added the smell of motor oil exhaust residue and industrial solvent to the experience. Pruitt sat on the south side of Asheville on a stretch of highway that had seen better days. The building was a low concrete block structure, painted the color of old mustard, with a gravel lot out front and a row of 4 service bays that opened onto the street. The sign above the door read Pruitt's Auto and Cycle Full Service in red letters that had been fading for at least a decade. There was a glass-walled office at the back of the shop floor, elevated slightly on a platform, so that the man inside could look down on everything and everyone below him. That was the point of the elevation. That was entirely the point. Dale Pruitt was 52 years old, and he had arranged every single element of his life to convey the impression that he was in command of something. The office above the shop floor. The nickname he had given himself, Sarge, which implied a military history he did not actually possess. He had enrolled in basic training in 1989 and washed out before the first month was finished. The recruiter who processed his discharge paperwork had used the phrase motivational deficiency in his file, which was a formal way of saying that Dale Pruitt could not be told what to do by anyone he considered beneath him. And in Dale Pruitt's internal hierarchy, almost everyone was beneath him. He was a man built from grievance and stubbornness. He had a square jaw, a gray buzz cut, and the permanently reddened complexion of a man who spent his days cycling between anger and the effort of suppressing it. He wore steel-toed boots every day of his life, not because the shop required it, but because the extra inch of height they provided mattered to him in ways he would never have admitted aloud. He ran the shop the way a man runs something, when his primary goal is not excellence, but dominance. There were 3 mechanics on his payroll. Travis Gear was 28, lean and pale, with oil blonde hair that he never quite got clean, and a permanent expression of mild contempt for anyone asking him to do something he considered beneath his dignity. His dignity had a very low floor. Cody Marsh was 26, heavier, quieter, and entirely content to follow Travis's lead in all things. Together, they formed the kind of 2-man unit that exists in every workplace where management rewards loyalty over competence, a unit whose primary function was not productive labor, but the reinforcement of the existing social order. They changed oil. They rotated tires. They handed each other tools while having conversations about nothing, and they took long breaks, and Dale Pruitt never said a word to them about any of it. And then there was Deja. Deja Caldwell was 26 years old. She was the only black woman in the shop, which in the context of Pruitt's Auto and Cycle was not merely a demographic fact, but a daily operational reality with specific and exhausting consequences. She stood 5'7", with shoulders that had been built by years of pulling and lifting and torquing, and hands that were permanently stained at the cuticles with the kind of deep grease that no amount of industrial hand cleaner ever fully removes. She wore her hair in tight braids pulled back under a bandana, and she moved through the shop with the economy of motion that comes from years of working in tight spaces where every movement needs to mean something. She was ASE certified in 8 categories. She had graduated at the top of her class from the Charlotte Technical Institute 3 years earlier. She could diagnose an intermittent electrical fault by reading the pattern of a failing idle. She could tune a carburetor by the sound of an engine's breath. She could look at the wear pattern on a set of brake pads and reconstruct the driving habits of the person who had worn them down. Dale Pruitt paid her $31,000 a year and gave her the jobs that no one else could finish. He had never in 3 years of employment once told her she had done good work. This was not accidental. This was policy. The Monday morning that everything changed began like every other Monday morning. Deja arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes before her shift. She made a pot of coffee that she did not offer to share, not out of unkindness, but because offering coffee at Pruitt's was a social gesture that required a social environment, and what existed at Pruitt's was not a social environment. It was a performance of hierarchy. She drank her coffee standing at the workbench in her bay reading through the job tickets that had been left for the day. A 2019 Ford F250 with an injector issue. A vintage BMW R90S with a carburetor problem that the previous mechanic she noted from a shop in Hendersonville had apparently given up on. A routine valve clearance adjustment on a Honda C750, and a 2018 Harley-Davidson Road Glide with a primary chain tension issue that the ticket described as intermittent. She pulled the Road Glide in first. It was the most complex job, and Deja had learned early in her career that you do the hard work when your hands are fresh and your mind is clear, because the hard work does not get easier when you are tired and overheated and 3 hours into a shift. Travis and Cody arrived at 7:15, which was 15 minutes late. Dale arrived at 7:20 and walked straight past them without comment. He walked past Deja without comment either, but the quality of the silence was different. When he walked past Travis and Cody, the silence said nothing. When he walked past Deja, the silence was doing active work. It was the silence of a man communicating through the deliberate withholding of acknowledgement that the person being ignored should understand their place. Deja had learned to hear that silence the way she heard everything else in this shop. She cataloged it, she filed it away, and she went back to the primary chain. By 7:40, she had identified the problem. The auto tensioner had developed a microfracture in the shoe, which caused the chain to skip under hard acceleration while maintaining normal tension at idle. It was the kind of fault that could drive a less experienced mechanic to madness, present under one set of conditions, invisible under another. She was reaching for the replacement tensioner when Travis, passing behind her with a cup of coffee he had not offered her, either kicked her toolbox tray with his boot. Not hard, not hard enough to be unambiguous, hard enough to shift the tray 6 inches and scatter her small tools across the oil-stained floor. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. "Careful," he said without turning around. His tone implied that the fault was hers. Deja set down the tensioner. She looked at the scattered tools on the floor. She knelt down and picked them up one by one and set them back in their proper places on the tray. Her hands were trembling slightly. That was when the ratchet slipped and hit the floor, and the sound it made rang through the shop like everything it was. By noon, the Road Glide was finished. She had replaced the tensioner, checked the primary chain stretch against spec, adjusted the clutch cable, and found while she was in there a small oil seep at the inner primary gasket that the work order hadn't mentioned. She fixed it anyway because leaving a known problem in a machine you've worked on is not something Deja Caldwell was capable of doing. She logged the additional work on the ticket and moved to the BMW. Dale came out of his office at 12:15 and stood at the edge of her bay looking at the Road Glide. "That was supposed to be a 2-hour job," he said. "It took 3 hours and 20 minutes. Deja said, not looking up from the BMW's airhead engine. "Because I found a leaking primary gasket and fixed it. If I'd left it, the owner would have been back in a month with an oil-fouled clutch. I didn't authorize additional work. I logged it on the ticket." "I didn't authorize it," Dale said again. His voice had the quality of a man who is not interested in the logic of the argument, only in the reestablishment of who is in charge of the argument. Deja looked up then. She looked at him for a moment with eyes that had spent 3 years learning to express nothing, and then she looked back down at the BMW. "The customer will be happy," she said quietly. Dale stood there for another moment, and then he walked back to his office. And the quality of the way he walked, the set of his shoulders, the deliberate heaviness of his footfall, communicated that this was not over. It was only paused. It was always only paused. The afternoon arrived in stages. The heat peaked around 2 o'clock. The fans redistributed it. Travis and Cody worked through a 4-car oil change queue, moving with the minimum effort the job allowed, and spent the time between draining oil and installing filters, discussing a fishing trip neither of them would ever actually take. Deja was deep in the BMW's carburetor, a Bing constant velocity unit that had been assembled incorrectly at some point in its history, with the needle clip in the wrong groove and the float level set too high when the sound reached her before the visual did. It was not a sound you could prepare for. It entered through the soles of her boots before it entered through her ears, a low rhythmic, chest-deep percussion that was less like hearing and more like being told something by the ground itself. She had heard big twin engines before. She had worked on plenty of them. But this was something different. This was the sound of a machine that had been built without compromise, tuned to a level that most production motorcycles never approach, and ridden by someone who understood what they were sitting on. She straightened up from the BMW and looked toward the bay door. The bike that rolled in was matte black with blood-red pinstriping that ran in tight controlled lines down the tank and fender. The front fork was extended. The rear tire was wide. The engine, and she recognized it immediately. The way you recognize a voice you've heard before, was an S&S 124 cubic inch V-twin displacing over 2 liters, capable of producing more torque than most people experience in a single lifetime of driving ordinary vehicles. The rider was proportional to the machine. He was large in the way that certain men are large, not soft, not exaggerated, but occupying space with the calm certainty of something that has decided it belongs where it is. He wore a leather cut over a black hoodie despite the heat, and on the back of the cut in white text on black were the rockers and the center patch of one of the most recognized motorcycle clubs in the country. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was not absence of sound. It was presence. It was the silence of a room that has just understood something. His name, though Deja would not learn this until later, was Rex Briggs. His road name was Hammer. His official title within the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club was Sergeant at Arms, which is the member responsible for order discipline and the physical safety of the club. He was 44 years old, and he had a face that had clearly been rearranged at some point in its history, with a beard that filled in the lines a difficult life had put there, and eyes that moved through a room with the systematic patience of a man who has learned to assess everything before committing to anything. He kicked the stand down. He dismounted. His boots hit the concrete with a sound that was different from the ordinary sound of boots on concrete. Travis and Cody did not exactly disappear. They simply became very interested in things that were happening in the far corner of the shop, things that apparently required their complete and undivided attention, and happened to position them as far from the bay door as was physically possible while remaining technically on the premises. Dale Pruitt came out of his office. His face was the color of old chalk. "Can I help you?" Dale said. He had arranged his voice into something that was attempting authority and landing considerably short. Rex did not look at him. He looked at Travis. He looked at Cody. And then he looked at Deja, who had not moved from her position beside the BMW and who was looking back at him with the direct assessing attention of a professional evaluating a machine that has just been brought to her. "My bike," Rex said. His voice was the vocal equivalent of the engine he'd just shut off, deep, unhurried, and containing more power than it was currently displaying. "It's coughing at low idle, misfiring when I drop a gear. I need it fixed." "We're booked 2 weeks out," Dale said, finding a little more volume now that he had something to say that was also a rejection. "We don't take walk-ins on custom builds. Liability." Rex turned his head and looked at Dale. He didn't say anything. He simply looked at him the way you look at a thing you are deciding whether to move or walk around. "I'm passing through," Rex said. "I have a chapter waiting on me in Tennessee. I need a mechanic who knows what they're doing, not an appointment. Now." Dale looked at the bike. He looked at Rex. He looked at the 2 mechanics who had positioned themselves in the corner and were finding their work very interesting. He was calculating. He was a man who bullied people he considered beneath him, and deferred to people he was afraid of. And in this moment, both categories were present and pulling in opposite directions. It was Deja who ended the calculation. "I'll take a look at it," she said. The words landed in the silence like the first stone dropped in still water. Dale spun around. His face had moved past pale into something that was trying to find the color of control. "Caldwell?" His voice snapped her last name like a door closing. "You have a job ticket on that BMW. "I can do this first," Deja said. She was already moving toward the chopper, her eyes on the engine. She was not looking at Dale. She was not looking at Rex. She was looking at the machine, and her expression had changed in the way that an expert's expression changes when they encounter something genuinely interesting. "It sounds like a rich condition. Could be the altitude." "You come through the Blue Ridge." Rex watched her approach his bike. He was still watching her with the patient attention he brought to all assessment, but something in the quality of that attention had shifted. "Blue Ridge Parkway," he said, "down from the Smokies." "Mixture screw wasn't adjusted for the elevation change," Deja said. She crouched beside the engine without touching it. "You're drowning the plugs. What cam are you running?" A pause. 585, Rex said. Deja looked up at him, then just briefly. "I can hear it," she said. "The lope. It wants to run hard. You're choking it." Something moved in Rex Briggs's eyes. Something that looked, if you were watching carefully, like the beginning of respect finding its footing. "Don't touch that bike," Dale said. His voice had found some volume now. He stepped between Deja and the chopper. "We do not take walk-ins. I run this shop and I say we do not have time for this." Rex Briggs turned to look at Dale and Pruitt. He turned slowly with the unhurried movement of a man who has never needed to rush to make a point. "She says she can fix it," Rex said. "I say I'm paying cash. You got a problem with that, boss?" Dale turned purple. The color started at his collar and moved upward. He looked at Rex, who was waiting with the patience of a mountain, and then he looked at Deja, who was waiting with the patience of a professional, and then he looked at Travis and Cody, who were deeply involved in something in the corner and could offer him no assistance whatsoever. "1 hour," Dale said. The words came out like they had been pulled from him. "If it's not done in 1 hour." But Deja was already working. What happened over the next 50 minutes was in its own way a performance. Not a performance for an audience. Deja was not aware of being watched. Or if she was, she had set the awareness aside in the way that true professionals set aside everything that is not the work. It was a performance in the way that excellence is always a performance, even when no one is watching. It was the display of a skill that had been built over years, through thousands of hours of effort, through failures and corrections, and the accumulated wisdom of every engine she had ever listened to. She began with the plugs. She pulled all 4 and laid them on a clean rag, reading them the way you read a letter, looking for what the combustion chamber had been trying to say. They were black, not carbon fouled from normal running. Black in the specific wet way of an engine that has been flooding its cylinders with unburned fuel coating the electrode in a deposit that told the story of every mile since the last adjustment hadn't been made. "Fire it up for 10 seconds, she said. Rex straddled the bike and hit the starter. The engine roared to life, filling the shop with sound, and Deja crouched beside it with her head tilted at an angle, her eyes closed, listening. Not to the surface of the sound the way an inexperienced mechanic listens. To the structure of it, the rhythm beneath the rhythm. The place where the firing event was hesitating by a fraction of a degree, creating the subtle stumble that she had heard from 30 feet away when the bike first rolled in. "Kill it." The silence returned. She cleaned the plugs. She re-gapped them. She reinstalled them with the torque of someone who understands that a spark plug is a precision instrument and not a fastener. Then she reached into the tight space behind the air cleaner, her forearm pressed against the hot exhaust pipe, and found the mixture screw by feel. She turned it out a quarter turn. She listened to the change in the engine's idle, which was not running, but which she could hear anyway in the way that experienced mechanics can hear what an engine will do before they start it by reading the state of everything connected to it. She turned it another eighth of a turn. She pulled her arm back. There was a burn mark on her forearm from the exhaust pipe. She did not look at it. Start it again. The engine caught, and this time the idle was different. It was not merely running. It had settled into itself, found its rhythm, expressed the confidence of a machine that was finally getting what it needed. The stutter was gone. The hesitation was gone. The 585 cam's aggressive lope, that characteristic V-twin heartbeat that sounds like controlled, barely contained violence, was clear and clean and correct. Rex revved it once. The throttle response was instantaneous with none of the bog that had been there before. He let it drop back to idle and sat there for a moment, his hands on the bars, his head slightly forward listening. He killed the engine. The shop was very quiet. Rex Briggs stood up from the bike and looked at Deja Caldwell, who was wiping her hands on a rag and not making eye contact with anyone, because she was still in the mental space of the work, that focused, slightly separate state that comes after a difficult problem has been solved and before the ordinary world comes back in. "Nobody's been able to get that flat spot out since I built it," Rex said. His voice was quieter than it had been before. Deja looked up at him. "It's in the air bleed," she said. "People look for the complicated problem. The simple thing is almost always the answer." Rex reached into his cut. He pulled out a roll of bills that was substantial, like the kind of roll that says that the person carrying it has decided that cash is more honest than other forms of payment. He peeled off bills and held them out to her. Deja looked at the bills. "Shop rate is—" "I'm not paying the shop rate," Rex said. "I'm paying the mechanic." He pressed the bills into her hand. $500. She looked at them. She was doing math in her head, the kind of math that involves her mother's dialysis copay and her brother's tuition deposit and the rent that was due in 4 days, and in the midst of that math, something in her face moved. Not a lot, not enough for most people to see. Just a slight easing around the eyes, the way a person's face moves when a small piece of weight is lifted. She tucked the bills into the front pocket of her coveralls. Rex turned toward Dale Pruitt's office. Dale was standing at the window looking down at the shop floor, and his face had moved through several colors since the work began and had arrived now at something that was no longer about the customer or the bike or the proper conduct of a licensed repair facility. Rex caught Dale's eye through the glass. He raised his right hand and extended a thumb upward. It was a simple gesture. It was meant to communicate that the work was good, that the customer was satisfied that the mechanic had performed exactly as promised. Dale Pruitt looked at that gesture and saw something else entirely. He saw a man he was afraid of publicly endorsing his employee in his own shop. He saw a black woman receiving cash and recognition from someone who terrified him. He saw his authority being measured against something real and being found considerably shorter than the noise it made. And underneath all of that, underneath the professional grievance and the managerial outrage, there was something uglier and simpler, the pure poisonous bitterness of a man who has never had to reckon with the possibility that the person he has spent years diminishing might actually be better at the only thing that matters than he will ever be. He came out of the office before Rex had his helmet on. Rex Briggs left with a roar that rattled the panels in the bay doors and left a clean stripe of rubber on the concrete, a kind of signature or a period at the end of a sentence. And then he was gone and the shop was quiet again, and Deja was turning back to the BMW when she heard Dale's voice behind her. "Give me the money," and she turned around. Dale was standing 4 feet away. His arms were at his sides. His hands were not quite fists, but were trending in that direction. "The cash he gave you," Dale said, "that's company revenue. You performed that work on company time with company tools in my shop. That money belongs to Pruitt's." Deja looked at him for a moment. "He paid the shop invoice at the counter," she said. Her voice was steady. "I watched him sign the credit slip. This," she touched the front pocket of her coveralls, "is a tip, a personal tip for the mechanic. That is not company revenue." "You're running a side hustle in my bays," Dale said. His voice was rising now, finding the anger that had been building for 50 minutes since the moment Rex Briggs had walked past him without stopping. "You solicited that customer against my direct instruction. You underbid me. You made me look. I fixed a bike you were too scared to touch," Deja said. The words came out with a precision that surprised even her. Not loud, not angry, but exact. "I saved your shop's reputation with a man who could have made your afternoon very difficult. I did the job. I didn't ask you to do the bomb." Dale's voice cracked on the last word. "I told you to work on the Henderson car. You disobeyed a direct order you brought." He stopped, reset his face, working through something. You brought a liability situation into the shop without authorization. Travis and Cody had found their way back to a visible position. They were watching now, and the quality of their attention was the specific quality of people who can see what is coming and find a quiet pleasure in the prospect. "Hand over the cash, Caldwell," Dale said. He extended his hand palm up. "Hand it over, and then go get your toolbox." The shop was completely silent. Deja looked at Dale's extended hand. She stood there for a moment, and in that moment, anyone watching closely enough would have seen her doing a kind of internal accounting, calculating what she could absorb and what she could not, thinking about Loretta and the dialysis appointments, thinking about Tariq and the NC State tuition deposit, thinking about the rent. Then she thought about Rex Briggs' face when the engine had found its rhythm. She thought about the way he had said nobody's been able to get that flat spot out, and the way he had pressed $500 into her hand without ceremony because the work was worth it. She reached into her pocket. Dale's face shifted towards satisfaction. Deja pulled her hand out empty. "No," she said. The satisfaction drained from Dale's face so completely it was almost visible, like watching water leave a container. "Excuse me." "No," Deja said. She said it the same way she had said it the first time, not loudly, not with anger, but with the final quality of a door being closed. "I earned this. It is mine. You want to fire me, you go ahead. But you are not taking what I earned." Dale's face rebuilt itself from the bottom up, moving from shock through humiliation and arriving at something colder and more calculated. "You think you're special," he said quietly. "You think fixing one carburetor makes you special. You're a dime a dozen, Caldwell. And you're fired. Get your toolbox out of my bay and off my property. You've got 10 minutes. He turned to Travis. "Watch her box. Make sure she doesn't take any shop tools when she goes." That was the moment. That was the particular cruelty that was designed not just to end her employment, but to add a final layer of humiliation, being supervised by Travis Gear, who could not tell a torque wrench from a breaker bar, as though she were a suspected thief in a shop where she had performed 3 years of work that kept the lights on. Deja did not respond. She walked to her bay. She began to pack. Every tool had its place in the red snap-on chest she had been adding to for 6 years. Some of them she had bought while she was still in school, working weekend shifts at a quick lube in Charlotte to build the foundation of a professional kit. Some of them were gifts from her father before he died. He had been a mechanic too, and he had understood that a mechanic's tools are not possessions, but extensions of the person. Each drawer closed with a solid click. Each latch engaged with a precision that was in his small way a rebuke. Travis stood near the bay entrance with his arms crossed, watching with the expression of a man who is enjoying something he should not be enjoying. Cody watched from farther away, less certain that this was a performance he wanted to be associated with. Deja rolled the chest toward the bay door. The casters rang against the concrete joints in the floor. She did not say goodbye. She did not look at Dale's office. She did not give them the satisfaction of any of it. She pushed through the bay door into the afternoon heat, and the sun hit her face, and behind her the shop returned to its ordinary noise. The fans, the radio, the sound of people moving through a space where the most competent person had just been removed. 3 miles. That is the distance between Pruitt's Auto and Cycle and the rental house on Oak Street where Loretta Caldwell received her dialysis on a schedule that controlled the rhythms of the entire household. 3 miles through Asheville on an August afternoon with the temperature at 91 degrees and the humidity at what the local weathermen called oppressive, but which the people who actually had to exist in it called something less polite. Pushing a 300-pound snap-on tool chest 3 miles on city sidewalks is not a thing that most people would think to do. It is a thing that Deja Caldwell did because there was no other option. And because in Deja Caldwell's experience of the world, the presence of no other option had never been an acceptable reason to leave your tools behind. The chest had 4 casters, and they were good casters rated for shop floors, which are smooth and flat. Sidewalks in West Asheville are not smooth or flat. They are a series of frost-heaved concrete slabs interrupted by tree roots, drainage gaps, and the irregular subsidence of infrastructure that has been maintained on whatever budget was left over after more visible things were taken care of. Every joint in the pavement sent a vibration up through the handle of the chest and into Deja's palms, and her palms were already raw from a full day of work. The rain began 20 minutes into the walk. It did not begin gently. It began the way August rain in the mountains of North Carolina begins, committed, heavy, and without negotiation. Cars passed her on the street. A few of them slowed. None of them stopped. She kept her head down and pushed. By the time she reached Oak Street, her coveralls were soaked through, her boots were full of water, and her arms were shaking with a fatigue that was only partly physical. She wrestled the chest through the gate to the backyard, across the grass that grabbed at the casters, and into the small, detached garage that smelled of old lawnmower and dried paint. She muscled it into the corner. She latched the padlock. She sat down on a milk crate in the dark. The rain hammered on the corrugated tin roof of the garage with an intensity that made conversation with yourself impossible, which was fine. Deja did not want to have a conversation with herself. She wanted to sit in the dark and be a person who had just had the worst day of her working life, which she had earned the right to be in, which she allowed herself to be for exactly as long as it took the worst of the shaking to stop. Then she wiped her face with a soaked sleeve. Then she went inside. The house smelled of the bleach and collard greens combination that Deja had been associating with safety since childhood. The front room was lit by the warm yellow of a floor lamp in the corner, and Loretta Caldwell was in her recliner with the hand-stitched Afghan across her legs, watching a game show at low volume. She was 61 years old and looked older in the way that serious illness will add years to a face, not from aging, but from effort, from the daily work of continuing. She had the same eyes as her daughter, the same quality of attention directed now at the screen, with the careful focus of someone who is conserving energy for what might be needed later. She heard the door. She turned her head. "Deja?" Her voice was thin but certain. "It's me, Mama." Deja came in from the hallway, having left her soaked boots at the door. She had reorganized her face into something neutral. She was not entirely successful. Tariq was at the kitchen table. He was 19, long and lean, the way young men are before life has a chance to put weight on them, with a stack of calculus textbooks in front of him, and the specific look of someone who has been aware of a problem for a while and has been deciding how to approach it. He looked at the clock. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. He looked at his sister's face. "You're home early," he said. The words were careful. "Slow day," Deja said. She went to the refrigerator and opened it and stared into it, not looking for anything specific, just having something to do with her hands and her eyes. "Dale doesn't send his best mechanic home early," Tariq said, his voice steady and direct. "Not when the rent is due. What happened?" Deja closed the refrigerator. She turned around. She looked at her brother, and something in the quality of his attention, the unguarded, direct concern of someone who does not know how to pretend he is not worried, got through the neutral expression she had put on at the door. "I got fired," she said. She said it the way you say a word that you have been bracing yourself to say, not loudly but completely. "I fixed a bike Dale was too scared to touch. He fired me for it." Tariq's face moved through several things quickly. "That's wrongful termination," he said. "You can sue him. That's illegal, Deja." "With what money?" she said. "We have $74 until unemployment kicks in, and Dale is going to contest the unemployment filing. He'll say I was insubordinate. He'll say I was stealing." She looked down at the $500 still folded in her pocket. The money she had refused to surrender, the money that had cost her her job. "He's going to say I was stealing." Loretta had turned from her game show. She was watching her daughter with the eyes of a woman who has seen hard things and has developed an assessment of them that is neither optimistic nor defeated, but something more durable than either. "Deja," she said, "the copay is due Friday." "I know, Mama." Deja crossed the room and leaned down and kissed her mother's forehead. She could feel the papery dryness of her mother's skin, the fragility underneath it. She straightened up. "I'll figure it out. I'm the best mechanic in this town, and somebody will see that. I'll have something by tomorrow." She believed it when she said it. She would spend the next day finding out how wrong she was. Tuesday morning arrived with the particular brightness of an Asheville morning after heavy rain, the sky clean to a hard blue, the air not yet hot. The whole city temporarily washed into a version of itself that looked for a few hours in the early morning like it might be a fair place. Deja wore her cleanest button-down shirt, the dark blue one she had bought for job interviews when she graduated from Charlotte Technical. She printed 5 copies of her resume on the computer Tariq used for school, and she wrote at the top, under her name and contact information, the words ASE certified 8 categories. She had earned those certifications one at a time over 3 years, studying at nights and on weekends, paying the exam fees herself, building a credential that was supposed to mean something. Her first stop was Mercer's Auto and Cycle on the north side of town. Olin Mercer was 67 years old and had known Deja since she was 9, when she used to come with her father on Saturday mornings and hand him tools while he consulted with Olin about the kind of mechanical problems that require two experienced opinions. Olin had been the one to tell her after her father died that she had her father's hands and should do something with them. She walked into a shop at 8:15 with her resume and her certifications and 8 years of professional experience and 3 years of documented excellence. And Olin Mercer looked at her with the expression of a man who was about to tell someone something that is physically painful for him to say. "I can't do it, Deja," he said. He was not meeting her eyes. "Olin," she spread her hands on his counter. "You know what I can do. You've known it my whole life." "I know," Olin said. He reached under the counter and slid a piece of paper toward her. "Dale sent this out last night." The subject line of the email was "Urgent Warning, Employee Misconduct." Deja read it. She read it twice. The words Dale Pruitt had written about her were not just a termination notice. They were a fabrication assembled with a specific purpose of making it impossible for her to work in her own industry in her own city. He accused her of stealing cash from customers. He accused her of using shop equipment for unauthorized personal jobs. He claimed she had performed a brake job on an SUV that had been improperly completed, resulting in a near accident. He had copied the email to every member of the Regional Automotive Service Association, 15 shops, 2 dealerships, in the technical school where she had graduated. He had sent it at 11:57 p.m. on Monday night. While she was still pushing her toolbox home through the rain, Dale Pruitt had been at his computer composing a document specifically designed to close every door available to her. This had not been impulsive. This had been planned. "Every word of this is a lie," Deja said. Her voice was very quiet. "I know it probably is," Olin said. He looked genuinely like a man in pain. "Deja, if I hire you and a car comes back with a problem and the insurance company sees this email and this litigation history, I can't carry that risk. I've got a 20-year business." She went to 4 more shops. The conversations were shorter each time. At the Honda dealership on the east side, the service manager saw her through the window of his office and shook his head before she had crossed the parking lot. Dale Pruitt had not just fired her, he had anticipated that she would try to recover, and he had poisoned every source of recovery available to her before the sun went down on the day he let her go. By Friday, with the copay due and the rent 4 days past due, Deja Caldwell accepted a job as a pit technician at a Jiffy Lube franchise in Hendersonville, 18 miles away. The job paid $12 an hour. She would spend her shifts in a concrete trench 3 feet below the surface of the floor, removing drain plugs and oil filters from the undersides of minivans, while a supervisor with 18 months of industry experience timed her with a stopwatch and called out corrections through a headset. She was the best mechanic in Asheville, North Carolina. She was going to change oil in Hendersonville for $12 an hour. On the morning she started the Jiffy Lube job, Loretta watched her daughter eat breakfast in the clean button-down shirt she had replaced with a Jiffy Lube-issued uniform shirt, and Loretta did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would not make it worse. She watched Deja eat. She watched her daughter's face maintain its neutral competence, and she understood in the way that mothers understand things that the neutral competence was not acceptance. It was endurance. It was the particular endurance of a person who has not given up on anything, but is sustaining a weight that should not be hers to carry. Tariq watched from the hallway. He had found a job application for a warehouse in East Asheville and had filled out most of it before Deja had found it on his desk and torn it in half without saying a word. He would go to NC State in the fall. She had told him that, and she meant it, and she would make it true, regardless of what it cost her, which was the most Deja Caldwell thing that had ever been said. She picked up her work bag. She walked out the door. She had no idea that 11 days later, a man named Rex Briggs would walk into a Jiffy Lube in Hendersonville with a specific purpose, and that everything that was going to happen next was already in motion, had been in motion, in fact, since the moment she had pressed her palm against a hot exhaust pipe and found a mixture screw by feel in the dark. The engine, as they say, had just started. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical fatigue. It lives deeper than muscle. It settles into the part of a person that carries their understanding of who they are and what they are worth. And it works on that understanding the way water works on stone, not dramatically, not all at once, but continuously with the patient indifference of something that does not need to hurry because it has time on its side. Deja Caldwell had been living with that exhaustion for 11 days when the second Monday of her employment at Jiffy Lube arrived, and she drove the 18 miles from Asheville to Hendersonville in the dark, and she put on her uniform shirt in the employee bathroom, and she climbed down into the pit. The pit was 3 feet wide and 6 feet deep and smelled of accumulated petroleum product and the particular concrete dampness of the space that never fully dries. There were fluorescent lights mounted at eye level when you were standing in it, which meant you spent your working hours bathed in a light that was designed for examining the undersides of vehicles and not for the dignity of the person doing the examining. The drain in the center of the pit floor collected what fell oil transmission, fluid coolant, the occasional bolt that slipped from fingers, made clumsy by repetition, and it did so without comment because a drain does not comment on what it receives. Deja worked the pit with the competence she brought to everything. She was fast. She was accurate. She never cross-threaded a drain plug, never over-tightened a filter, never missed a step in the checklist. That the supervisor, a 23-year-old named Kevin, who had been in the automotive industry for 14 months and managed his uncertainty by being loud about procedures, called out through his headset with the cadence of someone reading from a script. Check one, Kevin would call from the floor above when a vehicle was positioned over the pit. Check, i.e., Deja would respond looking up at the undercarriage, reading it in the 2 seconds she had before the workflow moved on. She read more in those 2 seconds than Kevin read in 14 months. She saw the hairline crack in a steering rack boot that would become a failure in 40,000 miles. She saw the subframe rust on a 10-year-old pickup that its owner did not know about. She saw the differential seal on a minivan that was weeping gear oil in the specific pattern of something that had been weeping for longer than the service interval, which meant it had been missed at least twice by whoever had been changing the oil before. She said nothing about any of it. Her job was to change the oil. Her job was to call check and keep the line moving and not make Kevin nervous by demonstrating that she understood more about the vehicles passing through his bay than he would understand in a decade of working in one. On the 9th day, she mentioned the differential seal to Kevin. She mentioned it quietly, professionally, in the language of someone who is trying to be helpful rather than corrective. Kevin told her that her job was the oil change and the filter and the checklist, and that if she wanted to do diagnostics, she should find a shop that did diagnostics. She did not mention anything else after that. Loretta's copay had been covered by the $500 Rex had pressed into Deja's coveralls on Monday. There was enough left for groceries and 1 week of the outstanding rent. The second week of rent and the following dialysis appointment copay and Tariq's textbook deposit for the fall semester and the electric bill that had arrived on Wednesday with a highlighted past due balance. Those were all calculations that Deja ran in her head during the long stretches of the pit shift, when her hands were doing work that did not require thought, which was most of the shift. Tariq had found the warehouse job application again and filled it out a second time. Deja had found it again and sat across the kitchen table from her brother for 45 minutes in a conversation that she would not fully describe as an argument, because arguments require both participants to raise their voices, and Deja had not raised her voice. She had been very quiet and very clear, the way she was quiet and clear about torque specifications and compression ratios, because these were facts, not opinions, and the fact was that Tariq Caldwell was going to end the state in the fall. "You can't carry all of this by yourself," Tariq said. "I carried a 300-pound toolbox 3 miles in the rain," Deja said. "I can carry this." Tariq had not found an answer to that because there was no answer to it. It was not bravado. It was an accurate description of what his sister was capable of, stated without drama and received without argument. Loretta had watched the conversation from her recliner. She had not intervened. She understood, in the way she understood most things about her daughter, that intervening would not change the outcome. She had raised Deja to be the kind of person who would carry what needed carrying. The practical consequence of that was that sometimes you watched her carry things and understood that offering to help was not the same as being able to share the weight. On the 11th night, Loretta called Deja to the kitchen after Tariq had gone to sleep. She put her thin hands around a mug of tea and looked at her daughter across the small table that had been in the kitchen since before Deja was born. Tell me something, Loretta said. What? Tell me what it felt like when that bike ran right. Deja looked at her mother. The question was not what she had expected. Mama, tell me. Deja was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table. It felt like it was supposed to feel, she said finally. Like the thing was complete, like it found what it was looking for. She paused. Like I did too, I guess. Loretta nodded slowly. She sipped her tea. Then that's still true, she said. Whatever Dale Pruitt put in that email, whatever Kevin in Hendersonville thinks your job is, that's still true. Deja looked at her mother for a long moment. Go to sleep, Mama. You first, Loretta said, and turned back to her tea with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has said what she came to say. The 19th day was a Wednesday. Deja had been in the pit for 3 hours when she heard it. She was tightening the drain plug on a 2017 Chrysler Pacifica, her torque wrench set to the manufacturer's specification, her left hand steadying the pan, while her right hand turned when the sound entered through the concrete walls of the pit and reached her through a register that had nothing to do with hearing. She felt it before she heard it. It came through the floor of the pit, through the rubber soles of her work boots, through the bones of her feet, and up through her legs with the specific frequency of a large displacement V twin engine operating at a low idle. Not the polished emission-controlled pulse of a modern touring bike. The raw, slightly irregular heartbeat of something that had been built with intention rather than by committee. She finished the drain plug. She climbed the ladder. The lobby of the Hendersonville Jiffy Lube was a small room with 4 plastic chairs, a coffee machine that had seen better years, and a rotating display of air fresheners that no one had rotated in some time. It was currently occupied by 3 people who were not customers. Rex Briggs stood at the counter. He was wearing the same cut, the same heavy boots, and an expression that was darker than the one Deja had seen in Pruitt's shop. The 2 men with him were also in cuts, Iron Riders North Carolina bottom rocker, the same center patch. One of them was older than Rex with gray threaded through a full beard and a VP patch on his chest. The other was younger with prospect patches doing the thing that prospects do in unfamiliar situations, standing very still and watching the men ahead of them to understand how to calibrate. Kevin, the supervisor, was behind the counter. He was not having a good time. Sir, we're a lube shop. We don't have the equipment for motorcycle service you need to. Rex was not listening to Kevin. He was scanning the shop floor with the systematic patience of a man looking for something specific, passing over the 2 other pit techs, moving to the bay entrance, finding Deja standing at the top of the ladder with a torque wrench in her hand and motor oil on her forearms. He looked at her with an expression that said, I found what I was looking for. And underneath that, I know what was done to you. And underneath that, quieter than the rest, we are going to do something about it. Washington, Rex said. Caldwell, Deja corrected automatically. The corner of his mouth moved. Caldwell. She came around the bay entrance into the lobby. Kevin moved to intercept her with the energy of a man who knows he is about to lose control of a situation, but has not yet accepted that it was never under his control. You're on the clock, Caldwell. You can't. This is Rex Briggs, Deja said, not looking at Kevin. What's the issue? Rex stepped aside and indicated the older man with the VP patch. This is Boyd Holt, rides a Road King. He's got a death wobble at 85 miles an hour. 3 shops have looked at it. They all said tires. Boyd Holt was looking at Deja with the evaluative attention of a man who has been told something about her and is in the process of deciding whether it is accurate. He was perhaps 55 with the weathered solidity of someone who has spent decades on a motorcycle in all conditions and eyes that carried the specific patience of a person who has learned that most situations resolve themselves if you give them enough silence. They said tires, Boyd said. His voice was dry and level. I said neck bearings. I've got a run to Sturgis starting Thursday. 2,000 miles. I can't ride 2,000 miles on a bike that wants to kill me at highway speed. Kevin said, you cannot perform service on that motorcycle on these premises. Insurance regulations. If you touch that bike, Caldwell, where's the bike? Deja asked. Outside, Rex said. Let me look at it. Kevin said her name again with a specific rising inflection of a person invoking authority they suddenly understand they do not possess. Deja turned to him. She looked at him for one moment with the full weight of 11 days of pitch shifts and Kevin's headset and the check call and the warehouse application she had torn in half twice and the rent and the copay and Dale Pruitt's 11:57 p.m. email. She looked at him with all of that behind her eyes and none of it in her expression. Then she reached up, unsnapped the top button of her Jiffy Lube uniform shirt, pulled it over her head, and set it on the counter in front of him. Underneath was a black tank top and 3 years of ASE certifications and the knowledge of more engines than Kevin would see in the rest of his career. "I quit," she said. She walked out into the sun. Boyd Holt's Road King was a beautiful machine chromed and polished with the kind of careful maintenance that comes from a man who understands that a motorcycle is not transportation, but relationship. Deja walked around it once without touching it. She was reading it the way she read everything mechanical, looking for the story the machine was telling, finding the place where the narrative diverged from where it was supposed to go. "Grab the bars," she told Rex. "Hold it straight and don't fight me." Rex took the handlebars. Deja crouched at the front wheel. She put both hands on the lower fork legs and pushed laterally, feeling for play. She rocked the front end forward and back. She stood and ran her hand along the front tire tread, reading the wear pattern with her fingertips. 2 minutes, maybe a little less. "It's not the bearings," she said, standing up, "and it's not the tires." Boyd crossed his arms. "3 shops, it's 3 shops looked at the parts they were paid to replace," Deja said. She moved to the front of the engine and crouched again, pointing to the mount, where the engine connected to the frame at the lower left. "Your front motor mount. The rubber isolator is sheared. You can't see it from the top, the housing looks intact. But the rubber inside is gone." She looked up at him. "When you hit 85, the engine vibration harmonizes with the frame flex. The whole powertrain shifts left. That's your wobble." Boyd looked at Rex. Rex did not say anything. Boyd reached into his vest, pulled out a folding knife, and got down on one knee in the Jiffy Lube parking lot. He found the mount. He probed it with the tip of the blade. The rubber crumbled. It came away in pieces, desiccated and compressed dead in the way that rubber dies when heat and vibration have been working on it for too long without anyone looking. Boyd stayed crouched for a moment. He looked at what was in his hand. Then he stood up and looked at Deja with an expression that had moved past evaluation into something that had a different name. "Dealer charged me $400 for diagnostics," he said. "Dealers read codes," Deja said. "They don't read metal." Boyd looked at Rex. That silent communication passed between them, the compressed, efficient language of two people who have known each other long enough that certain agreements can be reached without words. A decision was made. Deja saw it happen and did not fully understand yet what had been decided. Rex turned out to her. "We need this fixed," he said, "and we've got 2 other bikes in the pack that need work before the Sturgis run. We need a mechanic. Dale Pruitt is dead to us." "I don't have a shop," Deja said. She gestured at the parking lot. "I don't have a lift. My specialty tools are locked in a garage at my mother's house." "You've got a garage?" Rex asked. "It's a shed, no real power. The roof leaks." Rex looked at Boyd. Boyd looked at Rex. "Get in the truck," Rex said, pointing to a black Ford F350 dually that had pulled into the lot behind the bikes. "We're going to see this garage." "You're not bringing the Iron Riders to my mother's house," Deja said. "She's sick. She doesn't need—" "We'll be respectful," Boyd said. There was something in the way he said it that made it sound less like a reassurance and more like a statement of policy, the kind of policy that has consequences for violations. Deja looked at the truck. She looked at the 2 men in front of her. She looked at the Jiffy Lube uniform shirt sitting on the counter inside through the glass door going nowhere. She got in the truck. The street where Loretta Caldwell lived was called Oak Street, and it was the kind of residential street that has a specific and recognizable character. In cities like Asheville, small houses set close together, well-maintained, in ways that demonstrate care without resources, with small yards and old trees, and the accumulated quiet of a neighborhood where people have been living their lives without much assistance from the broader economy for several generations. 3 Harleys and a dually truck arriving on that street in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon produced a specific and immediate effect on the neighborhood's ambient awareness. Curtains moved. A man watering his garden found reasons to remain in his front yard. The woman 2 doors down, who was always on her porch, found herself on her porch with a heightened interest in the middle distance. Deja led them to the backyard. She unlocked the garage. It was as she had described it, a shed. The roof had a sag in the center where a winter's worth of wet leaves had sat too long. The floor was cracked concrete with a drain in the center that had not drained properly in years. Old lawn furniture occupied 2 corners. A push mower with a bent blade occupied a third. And in the fourth corner, solid and out of place as a monument in a vacant lot, sat the red snap-on tool chest that Deja had pushed 3 miles in the rain 11 days earlier. Rex walked into the garage. He looked at the roof. He looked at the floor. He kicked the walls in 3 places with the heel of his boot, listening to what came back. He walked to the chest and put his hand on the top of it, not opening it, just acknowledging it, the way you acknowledge something that has been waiting. "It's got bones," he said. "It's a dump," Deja said. "It's a start." Rex turned to the 2 prospects who had ridden in the truck. He said 3 sentences to them quickly, and the 2 young men turned and left without question. He turned to Boyd. "Make the calls." Boyd nodded and stepped outside with his phone. Rex turned back to Deja. "Here's the situation," he said. He had the manner of a man who does not negotiate the frame of a conversation, only the terms within it. "You fix Boyd's bike today, right here. We go get the part. You do the work. We pay you double whatever the dealer would have charged." He looked at her. "And while you're doing that, we are going to take care of some other things." "What other things?" "Dale Pruitt has been sending customers away from the best mechanic in this city for 11 days, Rex said. "We're going to correct that information problem." "I don't want violence," Deja said immediately. "I need to say that clearly." "Whatever you're thinking." "Nobody's getting hurt," Rex said. "We're going to have some conversations. Do some consumer education." He reached into his cut and pulled out a roll of bills substantially larger than the one he had produced at Pruitt's. He set it on top of the snap-on chest. "That's for the garage. Materials, supplies, whatever you need to make this space work. Consider it in advance against the work you're about to do." Deja looked at the roll. She did not pick it up. "Why?" she said. "You got your bike fixed. You don't owe me anything." Rex looked at her for a moment. "You stepped up when everyone else in that shop found reasons to be somewhere else," he said. "You lost your job for it. That means something." He said it without decoration, without sentiment, the way a man states a principle that he has lived by long enough that explaining it feels like translation. The horsemen don't forget that. The sound of an engine in the street interrupted them. Then another. Then over the next 45 minutes, the sound of an operation that Deja could not have anticipated arriving with the organized efficiency of people who have performed logistics in difficult conditions before. A flatbed truck arrived first, carrying a portable hydraulic motorcycle lift that looked commercial grade and had clearly been sourced from somewhere that did not ask many questions about timelines. The 2 prospects returned in a pickup loaded with heavy-duty extension cords, a distribution box, and 4 industrial halogen work lights on adjustable stands. A third man arrived with a pressure washer and spent 20 minutes cleaning the garage floor and the drain until the concrete was as clean as cracked concrete in an old shed can get. Within 4 hours, the space had been transformed. The halogen lights turned the interior from dim and marginal to something approaching a professional environment. The lift was positioned over the drain. Extension cords ran from the house junction box in a configuration that was emphatically not up to residential electrical code but was entirely functional. The old lawn furniture was stacked outside. The bent blade mower was moved to the alley. What had been a shed was now a working space. Through all of it, Loretta Caldwell sat in her recliner inside and watched through the window. She watched the large men in leather vests move through her backyard with the purposeful efficiency of people who know how to build things, and she watched her daughter move among them, not directing, not explaining, just working her hands already in the motor mount of Boyd Holt's Road King before the halogen lights had fully warmed up. At 4:30, Loretta appeared in the back doorway with a tray. On the tray were 6 glasses of sweet tea and a plate of the shortbread cookies she made from a recipe that had come from her own mother and which she made only when she considered an occasion significant. The work stopped. The men in leather vests took glasses from the tray with a courtesy that would have surprised people who had formed their opinions of them from a distance. Boyd Holt said, "Thank you, ma'am. with the specific gentleness of a man who was raised to speak to his elders in a particular way and has not lost the habit. The prospect with the pressure washer held the door for Loretta as she went back inside. Deja watched this from under Boyd's Road King and said nothing because there was nothing to say about it. It was simply what it was. Tariq arrived home from the library at 5:15 and stood in the backyard for a full 30 seconds, taking inventory of what was in front of him before he said at normal volume, "Deja, what is happening?" "Go get the laptop," Deja said from under the bike. "We need invoices." The motor mount took 90 minutes. The replacement part had been sourced from a Harley dealer in Hendersonville. One of the prospects had taken Rex's truck and returned with the correct mount, plus 2 additional parts that Deja had identified as needing attention while she was working. She replaced the mount, torqued every fastener to spec check the frame alignment at the steering head, and verified the front tire tracking with a straight edge across the rear wheel. Boyd took it down the street and back. He came back faster than he had left. He stood in front of Deja and looked at her for a moment. "Gone," he said. "Gone down." Deja confirmed. Boyd reached into his cut. "Double the dealer rate," Rex reminded him. "I know what I said." Boyd told him and produced $800 in cash and put it in Deja's hand. Tariq, at the folding table near the porch with the laptop open, issued an invoice for the work. He had been building a format as the afternoon went on, pulling together what he knew about business records from the economics course he had taken in his first semester and the common sense he had inherited from both sides of a family that had learned over generations to keep track of what was owed and what was paid. The second bike came in while Boyd's Road King was still being finished. A 2015 Road Glide with a charging system problem. The stator had been running at partial output for long enough that the battery was consistently undercharged, which manifested as hard starting and inconsistent lighting. Deja diagnosed it in 12 minutes by checking the output voltage at idle and underload with a multimeter that lived in the second drawer of the snap-on chest. Replacement stator installed in 45 minutes. By 8 in the evening, Tariq closed the laptop and looked at the numbers he had been tracking. "Deja." He waited until she looked up from the workbench. "We made $1,200 today." She straightened up. She looked at him. "Say that again." $1,200, 63 cents. He held up the laptop so she could see the screen. "In 5 hours. Deja looked at the screen. She looked at the garage, the lights, the lift, the organized space that had been a damp shed this morning. She looked at her toolbox in the corner, no longer a monument in a vacant lot, but the center of something. "That's more than 2 weeks at Pruitt's," she said quietly. "Yeah," Tariq said, "it is." The moment lasted exactly as long as it lasted, and then Deja turned back to the third bike, because there was a third bike, and it needed work, and she was the person who did the work. While Deja was working in her mother's backyard, something different was happening on the south side of Asheville. At 9:30 Wednesday morning, several hours before Rex had found Deja at the Jiffy Lube, 2 iron riders on Harleys had taken up a position at the intersection of Tunnel Road and the access road that led to Pruitt's Auto and Cycle. They were parked on the public easement at the corner, which is public property on which members of the public are permitted to be. They were not blocking the access road. They were not threatening anyone. They were 2 large men on motorcycles existing on public property in the full exercise of their constitutional rights. When a vehicle slowed at the intersection with the apparent intention of turning toward Pruitt's, one of the riders would ease forward on his bike and exchange a few words with the driver through the window. The words were polite. The words were informational. The words communicated, in essence, that the mechanic who had been responsible for the quality work at Pruitt's Auto and Cycle was no longer employed there, and that anyone interested in quality service might want to consider alternatives. It was in the technical legal sense consumer advocacy. It was also in the practical sense devastatingly effective. Dale Pruitt noticed the pattern at 11 in the morning. He had been watching the driveway for the Henderson appointment at a vintage 1969 Corvette with a suspension issue that Dale had been planning to charge $600 to diagnose and had been hoping one of his mechanics could figure out. The Corvette slowed at the intersection. Dale could see it from his office window. He straightened up in his chair. He watched the Corvette idle at the corner for 30 seconds. He watched one of the bikes ease forward. He watched the Corvette's reverse lights come on. The Corvette drove away. Dale called the sheriff's department. 20 minutes later, a patrol car arrived at the intersection. The deputy who stepped out was the son of Olin Mercer, the shop owner, who had shown Deja the email and had felt the weight of that decision every day since. Deputy Mercer walked to the corner. He spoke with Rex, who had replaced one of the original two riders at some point in the morning, for approximately 4 minutes. He looked at the public easement. He looked at the access road, which was unobstructed. He looked at Rex's cut in his road name patch, which read Hammer. Then he shook Rex's hand. He got back in the car. Dale came out of his shop waving his arms. "Officer, they're diverting my customers. Those are they're parked on a public easement, Mr. Pruitt," Deputy Mercer said through his window. "They're not blocking your driveway. They're having conversations with people on a public road. They're criminals. They're citizens with motorcycles," Deputy Mercer said. "Mr. Pruitt, word around town is you fired the best mechanic in the county and then sent out an email calling her a thief. People talk." He put the car in drive. "You might want to focus on customer service." He drove away. Dale stood in the heat watching two members of the Iron Riders acknowledge each other from across the intersection. He went back into his empty shop and stood in front of the 1969 Camaro that belonged to Councilman Bert Stelling, a beautiful, brutal machine with dual-quad Holley carburetors, a modified big block, and a vacuum leak that had been hiding somewhere in its intake system for 3 weeks. The councilman needed the car for a Saturday event. He had been told it would be ready Friday. "Travis," Dale said. Travis looked up from his phone. "Get the Camaro on the lift." Travis looked at the Camaro. He looked at Dale. "I can't sync the dual quads," he said. "What?" "The dual quad setup, synchronizing dual carburetors on a big block. I don't know how to do it. That was Deja's thing. You said we didn't need to learn it." Dale stared at his mechanic. "Watch a video," Dale said. "Figure it out." Travis nodded and looked back at his phone, where he spent the next 3 hours watching YouTube tutorials about carburetor synchronization and understanding, gradually and with increasing discomfort, that watching a tutorial about a skill and possessing that skill are not the same thing. The Camaro sat in the corner of the shop and did not move. Olin Mercer called Deja on Thursday morning. The call came while she was in the garage making a list of parts needed for the 2 additional bikes that Boyd had arranged to come in for the Sturgis preparation. "Deja," Olin said. He sounded like a man who has been arguing with himself and has finally decided which side of the argument he is on. "I want to say something to you." "Okay. What Dale did was wrong. I should have told you that when you were standing in my shop." A pause. "I was thinking about my insurance. I should have been thinking about what was right." "Olin, let me finish. I gave your number to someone. Councilman Stelling. He's been trying to reach a mechanic who can work on his Camaro. Dale told him the block was cracked. He's asking for $6,000 for a crate engine." Another pause. "I don't believe the block is cracked. I believe Dale Pruitt panicked when he realized he didn't have anyone who could do the work, and he told a city councilman whatever story got him the most money for the least accountability." Deja set down her parts list. "Olin," she said, "thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just fix the car." The call from Councilman Stelling came 40 minutes later. Stelling was a practical man who had been in local government long enough to recognize the specific texture of a situation where someone was taking advantage of his lack of specialized knowledge, and he had been feeling that texture in his dealings with Dale Pruitt for the past week. He had sources, the kind of informal sources that a city councilman accumulates over years of attending events and knowing people, and those sources had been telling him a story about a mechanic who had been fired and blacklisted and had apparently set up operation in her mother's backyard. "Is it true you can work on American muscle?" he asked. "I can work on anything with an engine," Deja said. "But yes, American muscle is a specialty." "My Camaro is a 1969, Stelling said. "Big block, dual quad, Holley setup. It's backfiring, the idle is rough, and Dale Pruitt is telling me I need a new engine." "Bring it over," Deja said. "I'll tell you what's actually wrong with it." And there was a brief silence on the line. "You understand I'm a city councilman," Stelling said, not arrogantly, carefully, as though he was establishing something that might be relevant to what came next. "I understand you have a Camaro that needs to run by Saturday," Deja said. "Bring it over." An hour later, a flatbed tow truck delivered the 1969 Camaro to 404 Oak Street, and the street's awareness of what was happening in the Caldwell backyard went up another significant level. Several neighbors found reasons to be in their front yards. Stelling watched Deja work with the focused attention of a man who is accustomed to evaluating competence in others and is in the process of updating an assessment. She had the intake manifold off in 22 minutes. She found the vacuum leak and three more a cracked port gasket on the secondary carburetor that was invisible from the outside but would cause exactly the symptoms the car had been displaying. She found the crossed plug wires numbers 4 and 7, a mistake so elementary that it implied either complete incompetence or deliberate sabotage, and Deja had been in this business long enough to know that the two were not always distinguishable. Dale told you the block was cracked, Deja said from under the hood. 6,000 for a crate engine, Stelling said. Block is fine. She straightened up. This is a gasket, a set of plug wires, and a carburetor synchronization. $250 in parts. 2 hours of labor. Stelling looked at the engine. He looked at Deja. He looked at the garage that had been a shed 3 days ago and was now lit by halogens and equipped with a hydraulic lift and had motorcycles in various states of service, and a 19-year-old at a folding table issuing invoices. What would you charge? He asked. Same as the parts, she said. $250 for the work. Stelling was quiet for a moment. When the Camaro turned over 48 minutes later, clean idle, no backfire, the big block settling into the steady, purposeful rhythm of an engine that has finally been given what it needed, he reached for his checkbook. He wrote $500. He handed it to Deja. Don't worry about the zoning, he said. She started to respond, but he held up a hand. I know about the permit situation, a residential address doing commercial work. I can issue a temporary emergency repair permit that covers this address, indefinitely if necessary. Deja looked at the check. She looked at Stelling. Why, she said. Because Dale Pruitt lied to me, Stelling said simply. And because I've been in this city for 22 years, and I know what it means when someone who should have been supported wasn't. He picked up his jacket from the fender where he had draped it. And because that engine sounds exactly like it should, he left. The Camaro rumbled away down Oak Street, and the neighbors watched it go, and a few of them looked at the garage and at the woman standing in the doorway with a rag in her hand and a check in her pocket. The next person who appeared at 404 Oak Street was not a customer. He arrived in a dark gray sedan, wearing a suit that was precise and well-maintained in the way that a working lawyer's suit is precise and well-maintained, functional rather than decorative, built to be in rooms where things are decided. He was perhaps 50, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses on a chain around his neck and a briefcase that appeared to be organizing something substantial. Ms. Caldwell, he said. My name is Wendell Okafor. I represent the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club. He set his briefcase on the folding table and opened it with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this kind of thing before and finds the circumstances less unusual than they might appear. I've been asked to review your situation with Pruitt's Auto and Cycle. Based on what I've been given so far, you have a strong wrongful termination claim, a clear defamation case based on the email, and he put on his reading glasses and looked at a document, what appears to be 3 years of misclassified labor with significant unpaid overtime. Deja looked at him. She looked at Rex, who was leaning against the garage door with the particular expression of someone who has made an arrangement and is watching it deploy correctly. I can't afford a lawyer, she said. Pro bono, Okafor said. The club covers my retainer. He looked up over his glasses. And frankly, Mr. Pruitt has been a source of aggravation to my clients for some time. I'd find it professionally satisfying to take him apart. A pause. Legally speaking. Tariq pulled up a chair. Deja looked at the check from Stelling in her hand. She looked at the garage lit up, running alive. She looked at her toolbox in the corner and the bikes in various states of completion, and her brother at the table with the laptop open to a spreadsheet that was for the first time in 11 days showing numbers that moved in the right direction. She thought about the day she had stood at Olin Mercer's counter and read Dale Pruitt's email. She thought about the pit in Hendersonville and the 11 days of calling check into the undersides of vehicles that deserved better attention than they were getting. She thought about her mother's hands around a mug of tea and the shortbread cookies on a tray carried out to men in leather vests who said, "Thank you, ma'am," and the thing Loretta had said at the kitchen table on the 11th night that's still true. Tell me what you need, she said to Okafor. Pay stubs, he said. All of them. 3 years. And the termination letter if you have one. I have everything, Deja said. She went to the toolbox. Third drawer from the top back left corner, behind the specialty sockets, a manila envelope sealed with 3 years of documentation inside. She had kept it there because the toolbox was the thing she trusted most, the thing she knew no one would take from her. She put it on the table in front of Wendell Okafor. Outside, the sun was going down over the mountains, painting the sky in the bruised colors of an Asheville evening. The halogen lights in the garage were brighter than the fading day, and the shop, because that was what it was now, regardless of what any permit said, was full of the purposeful sound of work being done correctly. Somewhere across town, Dale Pruitt was sitting in an empty shop looking at a Camaro that was gone and a phone that wasn't ringing. And in the manila envelope on the folding table at 404 Oak Street, 3 years of evidence was being read by a man who knew exactly what to do with it. The engine had found its rhythm. There is a difference between winning and being right. Most people spend their lives hoping those two things will eventually become the same thing. They operate on the assumption that if you are good enough, if you work hard enough, if you keep your head down and do the job with the skill and honesty it deserves, the world will eventually arrange itself around that goodness and reflect it back to you in some recognizable form. They hold on to that assumption the way you hold on to a railing on a steep staircase, not because the railing is beautiful, but because letting go means accepting that there is nothing between you and the fall. Deja Caldwell had been holding that railing for 3 years at Pruitt's Auto and Cycle. She had held it through every morning that Dale walked past Travis and Cody without comment and stopped at her bay to find something wrong. She had held it through every job ticket that came to her because it was too complex for anyone else, and every paycheck that reflected none of the value of that complexity. She had held it through the day the ratchet hit the floor, and through the rain, and through the pit in Hendersonville, and through 11 days of calling check into the undercarriage of minivans. She had been right the entire time. Saturday morning arrived cool and clear, the mountains holding the overnight temperature down long enough to give the city a few hours of breathable air before the August heat reasserted itself. Deja woke at 5:30. She lay in bed for exactly the amount of time it takes a person to confirm that they are awake and that what they think is about to happen is actually about to happen. Then she got up. She took a shower. She put on the dark blue button-down shirt she had worn to job interviews. She pressed it the night before with the iron from the hall closet, and she did it carefully because the details of how you present yourself when you enter a room to reclaim something matter not to the room but to you. They are the physical language of intention. They say, I know what this is, and I am dressed for it accordingly. She went to the kitchen. Loretta was already awake. This was not unusual. Loretta's sleep had been irregular since the kidney failure progressed, and she had developed the habit of being awake in the early hours with her tea and the quiet of the house in a way that she described not as insomnia but as extra time. She looked at her daughter in the pressed shirt and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, Sit down. Deja sat. Loretta poured her a cup of coffee without being asked, which was the particular language of a mother who understands that some mornings require the gesture more than the caffeine. She set it in front of her daughter and sat down across from her with her tea. You're not angry, Loretta said. It was not a question. No, Deja said. Good. Loretta wrapped her hands around her mug. Angry people make mistakes. They go in hot and they say the wrong thing and give the other person something to use. She looked at her daughter. You go in clear. You let the paper do the talking. You let that lawyer do the talking. You just be the reason the paper exists. Deja drank her coffee. And Deja. Loretta waited until their eyes were level. Whatever he says when he's backed into that corner, and he will say something because men like Dale always say something when they're losing, you let it land and you let it go. You do not give him the satisfaction of seeing it hit. I know, Mama. I know you know, Loretta said. I'm telling you anyway. Tariq appeared in the doorway at 6:15 in a collared shirt that he had clearly also pressed. He looked at Deja. He looked at Loretta. He sat down and accepted the coffee that Loretta had already poured for him because she had heard him in the hallway. The three of them sat in the kitchen in the early morning quiet, and no one said anything for a while, and it was the most comfortable silence that house had held in 11 days. Wendell Okafor arrived at 7:45 in the same precise gray sedan and the same well-maintained suit. He carried his briefcase with the ease of a man who has carried it into enough significant rooms that it has become an extension of his professional identity rather than an accessory. He shook Deja's hand at the door and looked at the pressed shirt. "Good," he said simply. Rex arrived at 8. He did not come alone. There were 4 other Iron Riders with him, all in cuts, all on bikes, all wearing the particular expression of people who have somewhere specific to be and understand the nature of the occasion. They did not come inside. They parked at the curb in a line that was visible from the street and more specifically visible from the direction of Pruitt's Auto and Cycle. Rex walked to the porch. "We'll follow the car," he said to Deja. "We stop at the curb, we stay outside." He looked at her steadily. "This is your thing. We're just visible." Deja looked at the line of bikes. She looked at Rex. "Thank you," she said. Rex made a sound that was not quite a word and walked back to his bike. Okafor drove. Deja sat in the passenger seat with the manila folder in her lap. A copy of the full documentation set the originals having been secured in Okafor's office the night before. She held the folder the way you hold something that contains more than paper. The folder contained 3 years. It contained every morning she had arrived 15 minutes early, and every afternoon she had stayed until the job was finished, and every diagnostic she had run on problems that Travis and Cody could not begin to approach. It contained the differential between what Dale Pruitt had paid her and what her labor was worth calculated by Okafor's team with the specific methodology that employment lawyers use when they are preparing to make that differential someone else's problem. Behind the sedan, 5 Harleys followed at a respectful distance, their engines a low rolling statement of accompaniment. Pruitt's Auto and Cycle had not had a good week. The Iron Rider's presence at the intersection had been replaced after Deputy Mercer's visit with a rotating informal information campaign that was technically within every applicable legal boundary and practically catastrophic for foot traffic. Word had moved through the automotive community of Asheville, the way word moves in any community where people know each other and care about their vehicles through conversation, at gas stations, through the kind of discussion that happens in parking lots and hardware stores and anywhere else that men who work with their hands gather and talk about the things they know. The story of Dale Pruitt's email had traveled further than the email itself. The story of what the email accused and what was actually true had been told in several versions, each of which agreed on the essential facts that a skilled mechanic had been fired, blacklisted, and lied about, and each of which ended with the same conclusion: Pruitt's was a shop you did not need to use if you had alternatives. By Saturday morning, Dale had not had a paying customer since Wednesday afternoon. He was in his office when Okafor's sedan pulled into the lot, followed by 5 Harleys that stopped at the curb and idled down with the measured timing of something choreographed. Dale watched through the glass. He watched Deja step out of the passenger seat in a pressed dark blue shirt holding a folder. He watched Wendell Okafor step out with his briefcase. He watched them walk across the lot toward his front door with the unhurried pace of people who know that time is currently working in their favor and not his. He watched the 5 bikes at the curb and understood that they were not coming in and did not need to. Dale came out of his office. He was wearing the same clothes he had apparently been wearing since Thursday. He looked like a man who had been having the kind of nights that follow the kind of week he had just experienced, sleepless and accumulating. His eyes were red at the edges. His jaw was set in the configuration of a man who has run out of options but has not yet run out of stubbornness. "Get out," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "I'll call the police." "Mr. Pruitt," Okafor set his briefcase on the service counter and opened it with 2 precise clicks. "You're welcome to call anyone you'd like. We're not trespassing. We're here to present you with a legal matter and to offer you the opportunity to resolve it without litigation." He removed 2 envelopes from the briefcase and placed them side by side on the counter. The left envelope is a lawsuit, wrongful termination under North Carolina General Statute 23-122. Defamation, specifically the email distributed on the night of August the 14th to 15 members of the Regional Automotive Service Association. Wage theft, 3 years of unpaid overtime amounting to $41,000, calculated at the applicable rate for an employee misclassified as independent contractor. Dale stared at the envelopes. "The right envelope," Okafor continued, "is a deed of transfer. The business, the building, the inventory, the tools, the equipment, and the existing customer accounts of Pruitt's Auto and Cycle transferred to Deja Marie Caldwell in full settlement of all claims. He folded his hands on the counter. In exchange for the transfer, Ms. Caldwell withdraws all civil claims. Additionally, my colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office, who have been made aware of the misclassification issue, will be encouraged to focus their attention elsewhere. The shop was completely silent. Travis was visible through the interior door to the bays, standing very still beside the Camaro-shaped absence in the corner where Councilman Stelling's car had been. Cody was not visible. Cody had apparently decided that Saturday was a good day to be elsewhere. Dale looked at the left envelope. He looked at the right one. He looked at Deja, who was standing beside Okafor and meeting his eyes with exactly the quality of attention her mother had instructed, clear present and giving him nothing. "You can't do this," Dale said. His voice had lost its rough edge and found something thinner underneath. "This is my shop. I built this." "You built it with her," Okafor said, without accusation, simply as a statement of documented fact. "The revenue records for the last 3 years, which my team obtained through the discovery process, show that 63% of billable labor at this facility was generated by work performed by Ms. Caldwell. The complex diagnostics, the specialty, repairs the custom work. The foundation of this business's reputation in the local market was built on her skill." He adjusted his glasses. "You didn't build this alone, Mr. Pruitt. You just made sure she never got credit for her share of it." Dale's face went through several things. It went through anger and then passed it into something that looked briefly and uncomfortably like the outer edge of recognition, the specific expression of a man who has been told something he already knew and has spent years arranging his life to avoid hearing out loud. Then it went back to stubbornness, because stubborn is what you have left when everything else is gone. "I want my lawyer," Dale said. "Your lawyer is on the phone right now with mine," Okafor said pleasantly. He looked at his watch. "They've been speaking since 7:45 this morning. My understanding is that your counsel has reviewed the documentation and is advising you to sign." Dale looked at Deja. For a moment, just a moment, the stubbornness dropped, and what was underneath it was not anger and not calculation, but something older and simpler and harder to look at directly. It was the face of a man who understood, perhaps for the first time with full clarity, what he had done and what it had cost. Not what it had cost him, what it had cost her. 3 years of that. Every morning. The moment passed, Dale Pruitt picked up the pen that Okafor had placed beside the right envelope. He signed where the tabs indicated. He initialed the pages that required initialing. He set the pen down. He picked up the box of personal effects that he had, and Deja noticed this detail because she noticed details already packed. It was sitting on the floor beside his desk, behind the counter, out of sight from the lot. He had packed it before they arrived. He had known this was coming. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned to Deja. And whatever he had intended to say, whatever final assertion of position or prediction of failure, he had prepared for this moment. What came out was something simpler and uglier and entirely in character. "You won't last a month," he said. "You don't know how to run a business. You're just a grease monkey." Deja let it land. She let it be what it was, the last move of a man who has run out of everything except the habit of diminishment, and she let it go because her mother had told her to, and because Loretta Caldwell had never once given her bad advice. "Maybe," Deja said, "but I'm the grease monkey who fixed what you broke." Dale Pruitt walked out of his own shop for the last time, and the door closed behind him, and the sound it made was ordinary, just the mechanical sound of a closing door, but it had the quality of something that has reached its conclusion. Rex Briggs, watching from the curb, tracked Dale's exit with the systematic patience he brought to everything. He watched Dale put his box in his car. He watched him start the engine. He watched him drive away. He did not move. Deja stood in the center of the shop floor. 4 bays. A paint booth at the back, freshly ventilated. A parts room with existing inventory. A glass-walled office, elevated on a platform that she was already thinking about dismantling, because an office that looks down on the people doing the work is a philosophy she did not intend to inherit along with the building. A full complement of professional-grade shop equipment, a service counter with a computer. Everything she had built toward without knowing she was building toward it for the entirety of her working life. She stood there and did not say anything for a while because the moment deserved its full weight, and she was a person who gave things their due weight. Okafor appeared beside her. "I'll file the transfer papers Monday morning," he said. The Business license transfer will take 30 days. In the meantime, you can operate under the existing license as the newly designated manager. He closed his briefcase. I'd recommend getting a proper sign made before the week is out. Establish his presence. He extended his hand. Congratulations, Ms. Caldwell. She shook it. He left. Travis was still standing in the doorway to the bays. He had the expression of a man who is processing a significant recalibration of his understanding of how the world works. He looked at Deja. He looked at the shop. He looked at the signed document on the counter. So, Travis said, you're welcome to apply, Deja said. Like everyone else, leave your resume at the counter. Travis nodded once. He collected his jacket from the tool chest where he had left it, and he walked out without further comment, which was the most dignified exit available to him, and which, to his credit, he took. Rex came in from the curb. He walked the floor the way he had walked the garage at Oak Street, checking the bones, reading the space. He looked at the equipment. He looked at the elevated office above the floor. First order of business, he said. Deja looked at the old sign mounted above the service counter. Pruitt's Auto and Cycle Full Service. The letters were the faded red of something that had been there too long. Black paint, she said, for the sign. She looked at the elevated office, the glass walls, the platform that said everything Dale had believed about his relationship to the people who worked for him. And that comes down. Rex looked at the office. He nodded once. And Deja said, I need a service writer, someone who can manage the counter, handle scheduling, talk to customers. She paused. Someone who can't stand for long periods. Rex looked at her with the expression of a man who recognizes what is coming. I'll make it, Deja said. She took out her phone. Loretta answered on the second ring. Mama, Deja said, how are you feeling? Tired, Loretta said. Good tired. I heard from Tariq. I need someone at the front counter, Deja said. Sitting down work. Talking to people, keeping the schedule, making sure customers feel like the shop knows their name. She paused. I thought you might want the job. A silence on the line, not an uncertain silence. A silence that is taking something in. What does it pay? Loretta said. Deja almost smiled. More than you're making now. I'll be there in an hour, Loretta said, and ended the call. What happened next was not in the plan. At 12:47 p.m., Deja was on the floor of Bay 1 going through the shop's existing job tickets and assessing the work that had been left incomplete when Dale's business had effectively ceased, a task that was part inventory, part archaeology, part the specific kind of honesty that comes from looking at work that was done badly and deciding what it will take to do it right when a black government SUV pulled into the lot. It was followed by 2 North Carolina State Police cruisers. Deja stood up. The man who stepped out of the SUV first was wearing a dark suit assembled for function rather than impression, with a federal ID clipped to his belt and the particular economy of movement of someone who spends most of their professional life in situations that require covering ground efficiently. He was perhaps 45, with a face that had processed a significant number of difficult days and had arrived at a working relationship with difficulty. Deja Caldwell, he said. Yes. Special Agent Harlan Vance, Federal Contractor Support. He produced his identification and held it for her inspection. We have a situation on Interstate 40. I need a mechanic. Deja looked at the ID. She looked at the 2 state police cruisers. There are mechanics in Asheville, she said. We ran a background check on every certified mechanic within a 100-mile radius with diesel engine experience and field repair capability, Vance said. Your name came up first. Then we ran it again to verify, and it came up first again. He looked at her steadily. Ms. Caldwell, I don't have time to explain the full situation on this lot. What I can tell you is that there is a military transport vehicle stalled on Interstate 40 with a load that cannot be left unattended and cannot be moved until the vehicle is operational. We need it operational in the next 90 minutes before a scheduled satellite window creates a secondary problem. Deja looked at Rex, who had been watching this exchange from 20 feet away, with the patient attention of a man who does not insert himself into situations that are not his to insert himself into. Rex reached into his cut. He tossed her a clean shop rag. Take the job, he said. We'll hold the fort. Vance looked at the rag. He looked at Rex's cut. He looked at Deja. $10,000 for the day, he said. Cash settlement upon completion. Tariq, who had arrived at the shop an hour earlier and was sitting at the service counter, familiarizing himself with the scheduling software, looked up from the computer. Deja picked up her toolbox handle. "Tell me about the vehicle," she said, walking toward the SUV. "Oshkosh Heavy Equipment Transporter," Vance said, matching her pace. "C-15 CAT engine. The on-site mechanics are reporting fuel rail pressure failure. They want to pull the high-pressure pump." "How long has it been down?" 41 minutes. "Weather at the site?" "Rain. Started about 20 minutes after the vehicle stopped." Deja stopped walking. She turned to Vance. "How much rain?" she said. "Significant." "Why, I'll say." She looked at him with the expression of someone who has just heard the most important piece of information in a conversation and recognizes it as such. "Because it might not be the pump," she said, and got in the SUV. Interstate 40 in the mountain passage west of Asheville is not a forgiving stretch of road under normal circumstances. In the rain, with reduced visibility and the grades that the highway cuts through the ridgeline, it demands full attention from drivers of ordinary vehicles. For the vehicles currently occupying a quarter mile of the right lane and emergency shoulder, it was simply the place where the situation had happened. The Oshkosh HET was enormous, a vehicle whose engine is larger than the engine bays of most cars, whose fuel system operates at pressures that require specialized knowledge to approach safely, whose electrical architecture was designed by engineers who assumed the people working on it would have access to a fully equipped depot maintenance facility. Deja had none of that. She had her toolbox, a rain jacket that Vance had produced from the back of the SUV, and the working knowledge of compression ignition engines that she had built over years of study and practice, and the particular education that comes from listening to machines tell you what is wrong with them. 4 soldiers stood in a perimeter around the vehicle, and the rain rifles held at the low ready. A 5th soldier, the on-site mechanic, met Deja at the front of the truck. He was soaked and looked like a man who had been told his solution was wrong, but did not have an alternative to offer. "Fuel rail pressure is at 0, he said. "I've tested the low-pressure side, and it's feeding correctly. The high-pressure pump has to be wound." "What failed first?" Deja said. "What was the first symptom before it died?" The soldier frowned. "It was running rough, then it—" "Was the roughness progressive or sudden?" "Progressive, over about 10 minutes." Deja looked at the engine bay. She looked at the rain. She looked at the point where the main wiring harness entered the firewall, and at the condition of the sealant around the penetration point, and at the way the water was tracking along the firewall surface and finding the path of least resistance. She climbed the wheel well. She put her hand on the fuel rail. "Crank it," she said. The soldier in the cab turned the key. The starter motor turned the engine heavy slow, the specific laboring sound of a large diesel being asked to fire without achieving combustion. Deja closed her eyes. She listened to the rhythm of the cranking. She listened to what was not happening, the compression events that should have been occurring in the cylinders if fuel was reaching the injectors at the right moment. She opened her eyes. "Stop." She climbed down. She walked to the firewall and crouched at the base of the main harness entry. She pressed her finger against the sealant at the edge of the penetration, and it moved soft, compromised. The way sealant moves when moisture has been working at it from both sides. "It's not the pump," she said. "Your ECU is wet. Water is tracking through the harness and shorting the injector drivers. The computer is commanding injection events, but the drivers aren't firing." She looked up at Vance. "The pump is fine. You need to dry the connector and reseal the firewall penetration." Vance looked at the on-site mechanic. The mechanic looked at the firewall. "I was going to pull the pump," he said. "The pump would have tested fine," Deja said. "And while you were figuring that out, your window would have passed." She turned to Vance. "Do you have a heat gun?" "We have a heat gun," one of the soldiers said, with the slightly surprised tone of someone who did not expect that to be the relevant piece of equipment. "Get it." What followed was 22 minutes of work in the rain that would have been difficult in a shop on a lift with ideal conditions. On the shoulder of a mountain highway with rain coming down and traffic passing 6 feet away, and a perimeter of armed soldiers providing context. It was the kind of work that strips away everything except the fundamental question, do you know what you are doing? Deja knew what she was doing. She dried the ECU connector with the heat gun, moving it in the controlled pattern that dries moisture without overheating components. She cleaned the connector pins with contact cleaner from her toolbox. She packed the connector with dielectric grease, from the third drawer of her kit. She resealed the firewall penetration with silicone from the second drawer. The silicone she carried because waterproofing a connection after you've serviced it is the mark of someone who is thinking past the immediate problem to the conditions the machine will operate in after you leave. Her hands were cold. The rain had found its way inside the jacket collar. The exhaust pipe 2 feet from her left elbow was hot enough to be a constant hazard. She finished. "Try it," she said. The soldier in the cab turned the key. The C-15 caught on the second crank. It built to idle with the specific authority of a large diesel engine, finding its footing, the sound of controlled combustion, at scale doing exactly what it was designed to do. The soldiers at the perimeter did not cheer. They were professionals. But something in the way they carried themselves in the 30 seconds after the engine started was different from before. Vance stood in the rain looking at Deja. "Our assessment team wanted to tow it to the depot," he said. "Swap the engine. That would have taken 4 days and $60,000. Deja said, putting her tools back in the kit with the same order she always used. And the problem would have happened again the next time it rained because the firewall penetration would still have been compromised. "How did you know it was the water?" She snapped the toolbox drawer closed. She looked at him. "Because you told me it started raining 20 minutes after the truck stopped. And because the first symptom was progressive roughness, not sudden failure. A pump failure is usually sudden. Water intrusion is progressive." She picked up the kit. "And because I looked at where the water was going." Vance reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. "As agreed," he said. She took it. "One more thing," Vance said. He looked at her with the careful expression of someone about to say something outside their normal operational vocabulary. "My team's mechanic has been in the Army for 11 years. He has depot maintenance training. He has operated in 4 countries. A pause. He said he has never seen anyone diagnose an electrical fault in those conditions in that amount of time. Deja looked at him steadily. "Tell him to check his firewall penetrations," she said. "Any vehicle that operates in variable weather. It's the simple thing. It's always the simple thing." She got in Vance's SUV. The radio call came 15 minutes into the return drive. Vance's radio produced the specific flat cadence of a federal dispatch communication, and the words it carried arranged themselves in Deja's understanding with the immediate physical quality of a blow. "Fire in progress. 404 Oak Street. Suspect apprehended on scene by civilians. Loretta Caldwell, unharmed." The last 2 words arrived a full second after the rest, which was the longest second of Deja Caldwell's life. "Drive faster," she said to Vance. He drove faster. The scene at the former Pruitt's Auto and Cycle, which still wore the old name on the faded sign above the door, but would not for much longer, was organized in the specific way that scenes organize themselves when a crisis has been resolved, but its evidence has not yet been cleared away. 2 fire trucks were present, their lights cycling. The source of the fire, a pile of oily rags near the ventilation intake of the paint booth, which had been ignited and had burned for approximately 4 minutes before being extinguished, was now a scorched patch of concrete and a residual smell of accelerant. The fire itself had been minor. Its intent had not been. Dale Pruitt was on his knees in the parking lot, zip-tied to the base of the light pole nearest the entrance. He had the appearance of a man who had encountered a situation that had not developed as he expected. His shirt was torn, his nose had been bleeding and had recently stopped. His eyes had the quality of something that has run out of calculations. Around him, maintaining a perimeter that the 3 responding police officers had quietly decided not to challenge, were 11 members of the Iron Riders Asheville chapter. They stood in the loose formation of people who are present and intend to remain present and do not need to explain why. Rex was at the center smoking a cigarette, his knuckles carrying the specific evidence of a physical exchange that had been brief and decisive. Loretta Caldwell was in an office chair that had been brought outside from the service counter. She was wrapped in the knitted afghan from her recliner at home, which Tariq had apparently thought to bring when the situation developed. She was holding a cup of tea. She looked at her daughter stepping out of the government SUV, and she looked at her with the eyes of a woman who has been frightened and has come through the fear and arrived on the other side with her composure intact. "I'm fine, baby," she said. Mr. Rex stopped him. Tariq was standing at Loretta's left, holding a baseball bat, with the grip of someone who had been prepared to use it and was only now beginning to process that the situation had been resolved before he needed to. He looked at his sister with an expression cycling rapidly between relief and the particular outrage of someone who has been frightened for someone they love. Deja went to her mother first. She crouched in front of the chair and put both hands on Loretta's hands and looked at her face with the focused attention of someone conducting a damage assessment on something irreplaceable. Loretta squeezed her hands. "I told you I'm fine," she said. "Go deal with what needs dealing." Deja stood. She turned to Rex. "He came back," Rex said. He said it without drama as a simple sequential account. "Came through the back. He had a can. He got the rags lit before we heard him." A pause. We were in the paint booth, all of us. The slight emphasis on all of us carried the full weight of what it meant for a man with a can of accelerant to walk into a building containing 11 members of the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club. "He didn't know you were here," Deja said. "He did not," Rex confirmed. Deputy Mercer approached from the direction of the police cruisers. He had the expression of a man who has been called to a scene for the second time in 3 days, involving the same parties, and has developed a comprehensive understanding of the situation. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, "Mr. Pruitt has been charged with arson, attempted assault, and criminal trespass. Given the circumstances." He looked at the zip ties, the patrol cars, the 11 bikers, and the government SUV still idling at the curb. "I think we all understand that Mr. Pruitt is going to be spending a significant amount of time explaining his choices to people who are paid to evaluate choices." He looked at Dale, who did not look back. "We'll take it from here." 2 officers helped Dale to his feet. As they walked him toward the cruiser, he turned once more. The zip ties were off now, replaced with handcuffs, and he turned in the grip of the officers with the specific final energy, man who has one thing left to say and is going to say it regardless of context or consequence. He looked at Deja. "You still don't know how to run a business," he said. "You're going to fail, and everyone is going to know it." Deja looked at him. She thought about her mother's hands around a mug of tea in the kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, and the pressed shirt, and the 3 years of documentation in the manila envelope, and the C-15 engine on the shoulder of Interstate 40 coming alive in the rain. She thought about the sound the ratchet had made when it hit the floor on a Monday morning in August, and everything that sound had started. "You already said that," she said. "It wasn't true the first time." The officers put Dale Pruitt in the back of the cruiser. The door closed. The sun came through the clouds at 4:30 in the afternoon, the way the sun comes through after a storm in the mountains, with the particular clarity of light that has been filtered through altitude and moisture, and arrives with a quality that makes ordinary things look briefly extraordinary. It fell across the lot and illuminated the faded red letters of the sign above the door with a light that showed more clearly than usual how much the color had been fading. The Iron Riders began to disperse in 2s and 3s. They shook Deja's hand as they went, or nodded, or said something brief that carried a full meaning in 2 or 3 words. Boyd Holt paused in front of her on his way to his Road King, the Road King, that ran clean. Now the Death Wobble, gone the motor mount, solid 2,000 miles to Sturgis and back waiting for it without concern. "Sturgis run leaves Thursday," Boyd said. He looked at the shop. "We'll come back through in 10 days. He looked at her. "I expect that sign will be different by then." "It will be," Deja said. Boyd nodded. He mounted the Road King and started it, and the sound of the engine steady, correct, fully realized moved through the lot and down the street and was joined by the engines of the other riders building to the kind of sound that is less a noise than a fact about the world. Then they were gone and the street was quiet and the late afternoon light continued to fall on the lot. Tariq was standing at the entrance to Bay 1 with the laptop under his arm, looking at the 4 empty bays and the service counter, and the parts room and the paint booth, and all the equipment that had been used until this morning to build someone else's business on top of someone else's skill. He looked at all of it, and then he looked at his sister. "So," he said, "what do we need?" "Start a list," Deja said. "First, sign painter. The name goes up before we open Monday. Second, I need to go through every uncompleted job ticket in that computer and contact every customer." She looked at the elevated office above the shop floor. "Third, that platform comes out. The office goes on the floor with everyone else." "And fourth," Tariq said. He had the laptop open and was typing. Deja thought about the service counter. She thought about the scheduling and the customer interaction and the face that the shop would present to the people who walked through the door. The first impression, the voice that answered the phone, the person who said your name when you came in and made you understand that this was a place that knew who you were and what you'd brought them and why it mattered. Fourth, she said, go get mama. Tariq put the laptop on the service counter. He took the keys to the old shop truck parked in the back lot. He drove to 404 Oak Street, where Loretta Caldwell had returned to her recliner and her Afghan and her tea, and he told her that her daughter needed her at the shop. Loretta set down her tea and went to get her coat. Loretta Caldwell walked through the door of the shop at 5:47 p.m. on a Saturday in August, and she walked through it the way she walked through most things, steadily, without hurry, taking in what was there with the full attention of someone who has learned to value what is actual over what is imagined. She walked past the bays. She looked at the equipment. She looked at the parts room and the paint booth and the job tickets waiting on the service counter. She looked at the space where the elevated office had been, which Deja and Rex had spent 40 minutes dismantling before Boyd and the others left, removing the platform and the glass and returning the back of the shop floor to the level plane it had been before Dale Pruitt decided he needed to look down on people. She walked to the service counter. She ran her hand along the surface of it, and there was something in that gesture, the way she touched the counter, taking its measure, that was both practical and private. She sat down in the chair behind it. She looked at the shop from that angle, the 4 bays open to the afternoon light, the equipment clean, and ordered the walls clear of the previous name, the space waiting for what it was going to become. Then she looked at her daughter, who was standing in the center of Bay 1 with grease already on her hands from the assessment work she had started on the uncompleted jobs. And Deja's expression, for the first time in 3 weeks, had lost the particular quality of sustained endurance and found something else. Something that was related to endurance, built from the same materials, requiring the same foundation, but was not the same thing. Her daughter looked like someone who had arrived somewhere. So, Loretta said, she settled into the chair with the careful comfort of someone whose body requires thoughtfulness. Tell me how the phones work. Deja smiled. It was not a small smile. It was the smile of a person who has been holding something back for a long time and has finally found the place to put it down. Tariq will show you, she said. Tariq showed her. At 8 o'clock, he closed the laptop with the day's invoices filed and the Monday schedule drafted. He looked across the shop floor at his sister, who was cleaning a set of calipers at the workbench with the methodical attention she gave every task. NC State orientation is the 23rd, he said. 3 weeks. Deja looked up from the caliper. I know, she said. You could go, she said. The words were not a question and not a suggestion. They were the same kind of facts she had been stating since the beginning of this. That was always the plan, Tariq. It's still the plan. Tariq looked at the shop. He looked at his mother at the service counter, going through the phone system with the careful attention she brought to new things. He looked at his sister. Yeah, he said quietly. Okay. He put the laptop in his bag. He said goodnight to Loretta and kissed her on the forehead. He walked to Bay 1 and put his hand briefly on Deja's shoulder, not long, not dramatic, just the specific contact of one person telling another that they understand the weight of what is being carried and they have not forgotten it. Then he was gone, and the shop held the quiet of late evening, and Deja went back to the caliper. Rex Briggs came back at 6:30 before Tariq had left, riding his chopper into Bay 1 and killing the engine. He sat there for a moment in the particular silence that follows an S&S 124 cubic inch engine shutting down. He dismounted. He looked at Deja. Rear brake is squeaking, he said. It was the same flat direct delivery he used for everything. It was also, Deja understood, not entirely about the brake. Owner only, he added. A pause. You are the owner. Deja set down the caliper she had been cleaning. She picked up her toolbox and set it beside the bike. She crouched at the rear wheel and put her hand on the caliper, the other caliper, the one that was actually squeaking. Pad is glazed, she said, in 45 minutes. I'll wait, Rex said. He sat down on the shop stool near the bay entrance, the stool that Deja had moved to that location from the corner where Dale used to keep it positioned so that people could sit while he stood. Rex sat on it as a piece of furniture rather than as a statement, which was the right way to sit on it. Deja began to work. The shop was quiet around her in the specific way that a working space is quiet when the work is the right work, not silent, but ordered. The sound of her tools against metal, the hiss of the compressor cycling, From the service counter, the low voice of Loretta speaking to someone on the phone and the warm, certain tone of a woman who has spent her life talking to people about difficult things and knows how to make them feel attended to. Outside, through the open bay doors, the evening light was finishing its work on the mountains, pulling the color out of the sky in stages. The ridgeline held the last of it longer than the valley, the way mountains hold everything, the heat, the rain, the sound of engines passing through. The sign above the door was bare. The painter was coming Monday morning, and the name that would go up there. The iron wrench in clean black letters with no excuses beneath it in smaller text would be there by Monday afternoon. By Tuesday, it would be the name people in Asheville used when they talked about where to take a vehicle that mattered. By Thursday, when the Iron Riders came back through on their way home from Sturgis, it would have already started to mean what it was going to mean. But that was Monday and Tuesday and Thursday. This was Saturday evening. Deja torqued the caliper bolts to specification. She checked the pad clearance. She stood and wiped her hands and looked at the rear wheel and knew with the certainty that comes from knowing what correct feels like that the brake was right. Done, she said. Rex stood from the stool. He looked at the wheel. He looked at Deja. He reached into his cut and produced without ceremony a folded payment. Shop rate, Deja said. Rex looked at her steadily. Shop rate. He agreed. He set the money on the toolbox. He put his helmet on. He started the bike. The S&S engine filled the bay with its particular authoritative voice, fully tuned now, the mixture right, the cam happy, the whole machine expressing itself the way it was built to express itself. He rolled out of Bay 1 and into the evening. Deja stood in the bay and listened to the sound of the engine fade down the street, moving through the gears, steady and clean, until it passed out of hearing entirely. Then the shop was quiet again. From the service counter came the soft sound of Loretta ending a phone call and setting the receiver down, and the small, satisfied sound she made when something has been handled correctly. From outside came the last of the day's light, retreating behind the ridge, leaving the mountains as dark shapes against a darkening sky. The quiet felt like exactly what it was, not absence, not the silence of a place where something has been taken away, but the silence of a place that is ready, that has always been ready, that has been waiting through 3 years of someone else's name on the door and someone else's claim on the work for the person who belonged in it to finally arrive. Deja Caldwell stood in the center of Bay 1 of the Iron Wrench. She picked up her ratchet, the 3/8-inch drive chrome vanadium steel, the one that had hit the floor on a Monday morning in August, and started all of this, and she set it back in its place in the second drawer of the snap-on chest in the specific slot she had made for it 6 years ago. Every tool in its place, she was home.